India will pass it, being the last one to speak before the break. Kaitlyn's going to be graduating with her degrees in honor management. She's going to speak to us today about her study on the effects of simulated drought on earthworm decomposition of forest litter.
Thank you, Dr. I'm talking about a pretty dry topic today. So, everyone is familiar with drought, I assume. Thankfully, in Michigan, we don't have to experience the dark red that's exceptional drought yet. So, previous studies have shown that more frequent and severe drought patterns are occurring in many regions, and this is linked to climate change due to factors of increasing temperature, drier air, and changing precipitation patterns. Drought has many impacts, and for humans, it impacts our water supply and our food supply. So agriculture is greatly impacted by drought, and crops can be damaged and ruined. As you can see in this picture, the before and after effects of drought, the vegetation is dried out and or even dead. And this can affect organisms that are living in the area because they have a lack of water, and if they're herbivores, their food resource is diminishing, vegetation dying. An example are earthworms. They don't survive well in dry habitats because they breathe through their skin. So in order for oxygen to pass through their skin, they need a moist habitat around them. And so whenever the soil dries out, then they dry out and they are not able to breathe. And they're also known to create estuation chambers. So in the soil, they line it with gut content and mucus to try to preserve any water that is available in dry times. So earthworms are very important. They're sometimes called ecosystem engineers because they positively alter the physical, chemical, and biological properties of soil profile. And that's some of the many benefits of them. They stir the soil column, so as they move throughout the soil, they create these burrows, as you can see. And with these burrows, it allows for water infiltration. So water can easily pass through the soil profile, and roots can take advantage of that to absorb the water. And they assist in transporting oxygen. And earthworms are major detritivores, so they feed on dead organic material and mainly plant detritus, so roots and leaves, which leads to them assisting in nutrient cycling. So they intake organic material, and their digestion converts it into mineral soils that plants utilize. And importantly for my project, they increase plant litter decomposition by eating leaves. So beginning with this idea was my interest in climate change and the worldwide impact that it has. And I was inspired when I talked to Dr. Paul Hazlitt, who's a forest soil scientist from Turkey Lakes watershed, which is about 45 minutes north of the Sioux here. And he was explaining to me the data that they collect at the watershed and the data that on drought that they've been collecting, the interesting trends that they have. So the data provided by Turkey Lakes watershed is a little overwhelming at first. So we're going to block most of it out and focus on this orange line, which represents severe drought, and then the red line, which represents extreme drought. And from 1981 to 1997, there were 0 years that experienced severe or extreme drought. But from 1998 to 2016, there were 5 years that experienced severe drought, and there are 8 data points that cross the extreme drought line. So from this data, we can concur that droughts are occurring more frequent and more severe at this watershed, which agrees back to previous climate models, like I said before, that this pattern is occurring in many regions. So the objective of my study is to look at the simulated drought effects on earthworm decomposition of forest litter. Beginning with my materials, I collected deciduous forest litter off of Gaines Highway, under a few feet of snow. So after some digging, collected the leaves and allowed them to air dry for a few months until my project was ready. And I used a homogeneous silty loam subsoil, and I had sifted through it all to remove any rocks that were present and any organic material, so any roots or twigs that were in there, leaves. So that ensured that the earthworms in this project relied on the food resource that I provided. And for this, I needed 4 different soil moistures. I needed one that represented a drought-like condition, so it was going to be an almost dry, sandy type. And then on the other, as opposite, I needed a saturated mud, and then 2 intermediate moistures to kind of get a gradient of soil moistures. So these were all calculated by trial and error. So through an experimental run, the earthworms were stressed but surviving in 12% soil moisture. As you can see, they're huddled together and trying to maintain any moisture that they still have. And then I looked at the literature, and it stated that 27% water was the field capacity for this type of soil. So I attempted that, and it was pure liquid mud. So I reduced the water until 24%, which, as you can see, it was like a soupy mud. And then, so I had my minimum and my maximum, and so I just needed 2 intermediate soil moistures, which happened to be an even 4% between the minimum and maximum. So with these soil moistures, representing my experimental containers are the rectangles. So I had 4 experimental containers, 1 for each soil moisture, and then I created replicates for each, so I can compare the results in the 2 containers. And my experimental containers consisted of a plastic tote and about 1.5 inches of soil, and 10 earthworms that I purchased from a local bait shop, 25 grams of leaves, and they were separated by netting, so it was easier to collect them. And as you can see in the picture, the earthworms could easily move in and out of the netting. And after an experimental run, found out that a cover is necessary, or else they explore around the room and jump from container to container. So the silty loam subsoil that I used was evenly distributed between all 8 containers that I had. And so I took the weight of the soil in each container, and then I calculated the amount of water that was needed to reach the dedicated soil moisture for that container. So that way, throughout this process, all I needed to do was weigh the container and add the water to restore the proper soil moisture. I restored the water every day for 6 weeks, and so this kind of provided a constant soil moisture for each container. The percent decomposition by earthworms was calculated from the beginning and final weights of the leaves. So as I said, there was 25 grams of air-dried leaves that I began with, and then after the 6 weeks of this experiment, the leaves were taken out and oven dried, so any moisture that was obtained during this process was removed, and this was my ending weight. So my hypothesis was that there's a relationship between the soil moisture and litter decomposition by earthworms. And my independent variable is soil moistures with 12, 16, 20, and 24%. My dependent variable was percent litter decomposition. So using a linear regression, I was able to look at the relationship between the 2 variables, and as you can see, as soil moisture percent increases, the percent decomposition by earthworm also increases. So with a p-value of 0.029 and an alpha of 0.05, I was able to accept my hypothesis that there is a relationship between these 2 variables. And an R-square value of 0.57, which it would be that's the correlation between the data points, and it would be a lot higher if it wasn't for this outlier. But at this point, at 20%, it didn't follow the pattern of litter decomposition due to mortality. So with that one outlier, I had all 10 earthworms die relatively beginning of this whole project, so they did not have as much decomposition as the others. And the reason that all 10 of them died is quite peculiar. I'm not quite sure why. There's a possibility that they got a disease and they all died that way, but overall the mortality was quite surprising because I was expecting the 12% moisture to have the most mortality because less water, harder to breathe, and they're visually you can see that they're a lot less healthy than the other percentages. But they were troopers and they had low mortality in that one, but the intermediates had the most mortality. And overall, any of the deaths could have been due to physical trauma. As I added water each day, I did stir the soil, and with that stirring rod, I could have caused some trauma, but I was very careful with that. I found multiple worms dead weaved in the netting, and they possibly could have gotten stuck there. They're easy to remove, so it makes me feel like they weren't stuck, but it is a possibility. And natural causes, they were bait shop worms that I had in tortured for a few months, so it could have just been their time. But for the 12%, any of those deaths could have been due to dehydration. So overall, there was a relationship between soil moisture and decomposition by earthworms. This could be due to oxygen accessibility. So with the higher soil moistures, they could have had an easier time breathing, and which means they're healthier, more active, and they ate more compared to the drought-like condition. And these findings suggest that there can be an increase in organic material as drought conditions continue to worsen. And previous studies say that earthworms do not survive in drought-like conditions. So if droughts worsen, then we can expect the health of worms to decline and decrease in their population, which that could lead to more problems like decreased nutrient cycling, so less mineral soils available for plants, less aerated soil profiles, less water transportation. So it is stated that without the burrows and allowing for the water to easily pass through, it could pool on top of the surface. And a decrease in decomposition of leaves, so a lot more raking. An accumulation of leaf litter may have its advantages of protecting seedlings and protecting soil from wind erosion, but the disadvantages are much more serious. They could impact seed germination, so depending on the seeds, they could have specific temperature, water accessibility, oxygen accessibility, and light requirements that they have to be able to germinate successfully. So with a thicker leaf litter layer, it can impact all of those requirements. And with an accumulation of leaf litter, it's fuel for wildfires, and so pairing that with the drought-like conditions of dry vegetation, dry air, warmer temperature, it could cause for more intense wildfires. I'd like to thank Dr. Merkel, my mentor, for assisting me throughout this project and answering all my questions. Dr. Paul Hazlitt for providing me the Turkey Lakes watershed data, and Dr. Zimmerman for overlooking my data analysis, and Elizabeth Yantz, my mom, for babysitting the earthworms while I had to go on a work trip. Are there any questions? Yes.
What water percentage is considered like extreme drought or severe drought, like in soil? Or does it just depend on region?
I believe it depends on the soil because there's different requirements for the different types of soils. Like for this one, I chose around 12% because visually of the consistency of it. But I'm not quite sure overall soil moisture for that condition. Yes.
Did you have a method to monitor the moisture percentage of the soil other than just composition?
No, I pretty much based it on the water rate that was needed. So whenever I weighed the entire container, I pretty much tared out all the other factors besides the water. And so that way, any difference in the weight was assumed to be the water that was evaporated, and so I just added water to restore that weight, and so that was at the good soil moisture percent. Yes.
You said you chose to use 10 worms per storage container. What led you to use 10? Is that like normal for that amount of soil?
No, that was pretty much just a call on our part. Any more, it seemed like it would be a little bit too much because the totes were only about this big, and so any more than that, it seemed like they might be a little too crowded in there, but it seemed like enough for this. Yes.
So in much of the northern hardwood forest, earthworms are not actually native, but have, in many cases, because of human activities, have been invading areas. So do you have any thoughts on how drought or differences in temperature or precipitation could influence the invasiveness of earthworms or anything like that?
Possibly reduce the expansion of them, and so it could reduce the invasive population of them in different drought conditions. Because if there's areas that have more of a moist soil area that don't have as much drought, then maybe the earthworms can inhabit those areas more and reproduce more in compared to drought-like areas where they could. Yes.
So you said you were very interested in climate change at the very beginning and as a whole. What led you specifically to the earthworms?
Earthworms?
Yeah.
So I originally wanted to look at the temperature effect on earthworm decomposition, and so I knew that earthworms were easy to take care of, and it would be a good test subject for a project. And so I originally wanted to look at the temperature, and that was also a result of climate change. And so then after talking to Dr. Paul Hazlitt, I changed it, and using the same structure of my old idea, just adapted it to the drought.
Great, thank you, Kaitlyn.